Hey guys, thanks for joining me again today. So today we're going to be talking about images inspired by shape. One of the things I like to do, like I've mentioned in the past, is I gain my inspiration for the images I make from the environment, and I take cues from the environment to kind of inspire the image I make. And it's a lot easier to come up with images that are unique or images you haven't seen before when you take these cues from the different environments you shoot in versus going online and studying somebody's work and trying to duplicate that. So I kind of figured out my own way of being inspired and creating things that are unique to me, and the environment has served me pretty well. This image was an image I made pretty early in my career. It was when I started to experiment with the idea of seeking inspiration from the environment, and I this is at a so basically to make it simple, um, this image was taken at the end of the night. It was a really long wedding. I think it was like about 11 or 12 hours, and it was at the end of the night, and it was it was dark outside, and I went outside the venue and I saw this particular venue had a bunch of arches. So there were several of them. I think there were actually more than three. But I had a 35 millimeter lens on, and I kind of figured three was the best number of arches I can get without, and to kind of fill up the frame without having to include more on the top and more on the bottom. And also, the rule of odds suggests that three is a good number to use. So I decided to use three. So kind of went simple with this. I had the couple stand right in the middle of the three of them. In retrospect, I probably could have done it on the left or the right just to keep it interesting and different, so it's not all symmetrical. Use the rule of thirds within the three circles or ovals, and I had my assistant photographer stand. So I'm basically lighting them with a video light camera left, and he's standing in between the column, so you don't really see him. He's hiding there, and he has his lights lighting them up. And what I did was also add a reflection with I think I used the bottom of my iPhone, the back of my iPhone, the glass, one of the glass backs or something, or even the front. I can't remember which one. And I used that and put it underneath the lens to reflect the top of the frame to the bottom and create these three ovals. And I just think it makes for a more interesting image just because this image has a bit of mystery to it. And if you weren't necessarily told, or if you're not familiar with the whole reflection thing, you wouldn't necessarily know how this image was made or understand, you know, what you're looking at, especially for the average person looking at a picture that's a non-photographer. So I think learning about reflections over time, having that little skill in my tool bag or my toolbox, allowed me to dream this up in a sense. And now that's something I do is, or I try every time I see a shape that's not fully formed. I generally will, make that image first, then try a reflected version to see what I could do. How can I change what I see in front of me to make it a little bit more interesting? So it's almost like it's almost like second nature at this point where I try to do reflections with shapes when they're the shapes up top. Um, and that's just something I try. And if you take that kind of attitude to different locations, and one day you stumble on a triangle and you try to reflect the bottom, and you now create a diamond or something, things start to get a little bit interesting and different. Um, so that's how one image feeds ideas for the next. All right. So the first image we looked at was basically an oval or circular in nature. This is one that's square, right? This image was taken, I don't remember the exact date, but like maybe 3 years ago. So there are several things going on in this image. It's a low key image, right? A lot of the black backdrop, and the shape behind the bride that she looks like she's emerging from. Um, And I guess this, beyond the fact that the bride is stunning, her dress is dramatic, and she looks like she's actually emerging from the painting behind her. The square also makes it a little bit interesting. And honestly, I can guarantee you that that painting was kind of like what drew me. Putting her in front of the square was what literally drew me to that image. And it wasn't until after I'd finished making the image and editing it in black and white that I noticed that she looked like she was emerging from the shape because of the similar textures. And when I think about it, I don't know if those colors were actually white. They might have been, but maybe because it wasn't converted to black and white at the time I took it, I couldn't see the actual blend in the textures, because they're probably like competing colors. Looks like a scenery, so yeah, they're probably like greens and reds and stuff like that in the scene, and it didn't stand out like it does now that's been post processed. But part of the inspiration just came from having just putting it in front of that and making the image. Um, there was some post processing to darken the environment a little bit because it was a hotel lobby and it was kind of noisy and stuff. But um, that was kind of like where I put all my focus is creating that shape behind her and just having her in front of it, and it just turned out extremely good after the fact. So it's just an example of something interesting that shape inspired. So there are several things going on here. One can say that this image was inspired by the light, right? And the shape of the light. But for me, it was inspired by both, right? And the fact that the shape of the light made a triangle. And that's kind of like why I was drawn to the light is the fact that it created an interesting shape that I could have run through my diagonals in my frame and place them in it. So and in addition to that, there was an interesting texture behind the couple. So these three things is what called my attention to that scene. The triangular shape, the diagonal, is what inspired this image. Fortunately, it was brought by the light, and that's why this image was created. Um, that was the inspiration for it. So here's another image that was inspired by shape. In this case, the window behind the couple was a semicircle. And like I mentioned earlier, whenever I see a shape formed on the top, I generally will try to reflect it on the bottom just to see what happens. So the couple are backlit, and I exposed enough to keep the backdrop, bright. And because they're backlit, we still have the shadows on the sides that were not lit by the lights from the back. And it's a simple reflection. I mean, you can even see their faces reflected slightly below them, or their heads rather reflected. But it was a simple reflection just to create a shape and create something unique and interesting. And this is an image I created several years ago. But that's just another example of how I take these different ideas and use them in different places. So this one is a street photography photo. This one um, is an image that was shot from one room through a hallway into another room. And again, it's just showing how one can use the natural frames in the environment from doorways, and lights and shadow to create shapes. Again, leading lines visually, but for the most part, rectangles and squares, um, to just create something interesting. I threw in a street photography photo just to show that as I've always mentioned, my attitude, my ideas transcend the different genres of photography that I shoot. As I take one thing from weddings and put it in the street, something else from street, put it in the weddings, and just merge those ideas together. So this is just one photo I pulled to kind of show how the sensibility goes across genres. This image was created in Baltimore, the Sagamore Pendry. And I know one of the things that made this image cool with a lot of people is they thought because I do a lot of light painting, the assumption is the lighting behind them, the light swirls or whatever, was something I created. And while I would like to take the credit for that, it's not something I created. It was just something I saw in the scene that really caught my eye, and I tried to figure out how I could use it to create something compelling for the couple. Um, it's a kind of like a light hologram in the hotel, and I've seen people approach it in so many ways. But I love that it was bright. Like I loved how it looked in black and white. I did not light the couple with anything. It was basically ambient lighting in the environment, and I just shot it as is, exposed as I needed to expose. It's a pretty dark hotel, but it worked out in black and white. So I just basically shot it with them standing right in front of it, um, and use that because they're somewhat backlit by it. Use that same ideas from the other ones to black out the parts of the scene that didn't really mean anything to me. That's kind of like the inspiration for this was really the shapes behind them. It's a pretty simple image, but looks seems complex because if you don't have any idea what that is, you assume the photographer, especially if you know about light painting and you've seen light painting work from the same photographer, you assume they made that light happen. But I didn't. I'll take the credit if people assume that, but when I'm asked, I open up and say, "Nah, it's just something that was there that I used." Um, but yeah, another example how I love to play with shapes. So I've shown this image before when I was talking about posing, but I also want to talk about shapes in this image. If you look at this image, you can tell that based on how I shot it, right? I was trying to create a triangle on the top with leading lines. So it's all the same thing, like leading lines, and using clean surfaces to create a shape, So I love shapes, like I've mentioned, and this wasn't a good example of how I use a triangle. I was able to find a triangle in the environment and use that. Um, I have another image that also shows how I take what I learned here and apply it somewhere else. And a lot of the times, these things are in the environment, right? But the difference is people aren't looking for them. People are just walking by and looking for some scene that they're familiar with, or not even thinking about the scene, but focused a lot on the couple and maybe focused on light, but not focused on light and scene, just focused on good light. So they get good light, then they forget about, the good light might be in a place where the background isn't really anything to write home about. But they're not thinking about that part. They're just thinking about the light. So they have the couple stand and they take 1,000 shots in the same place and just vary the couple's poses a little bit. And, for me, I spend a lot of time looking for scenes because my galleries are generally made up of images that are all different. I don't do a lot of repetitive photos that I notice a lot of photographers do. For me, if I'm doing that, I'm not excited about the shoot. Like, I need to stay inspired. I need to work hard to look for new, interesting scenes for my clients and for myself because it just keeps my brain working the whole time. And that's one of the hardest things about photographing the way I photograph is, you know, I'm always looking for a compelling scene. I cannot shoot in a backdrop that I am not inspired by. And while it's like almost doing double work, because I feel like I've seen work where people don't really care and they just place the couple and get a picture of the couple, or maybe do a shoot at 1.4 to blur out the background. But even when I shoot at 1.4 to blur out the background is actually a background that I want blurred out by design. And it's still going to be clutter free. It's still going to have elements that I want behind them. And so everything is kind of intentional. And being that intentional is a burden, but it also pays off extremely when you are that intentional. So what I took from this, I applied to the next image. Totally different session, totally different location, but the same perspective. Camera raised, clean backdrop, I found a shape, I found a circle. So I placed them on that circle intentionally. And I show the entire circle too. So I take these same ideas and just apply them in different places with slightly different environments. And it just allows for images that feel very unique, even though the concept or idea is the same. It's the same concept, same idea, different location, different structure, but it just looks unique and new every time because the world is unique. And man has created a ton of structures that are different, but still have similarities. They still have shape, they still have form, and they have color and stuff like that. So that's just a good example of how these ideas are moved from one place to another, and with the same fundamental principle behind it is looking for shape. So here's another one that has an interesting shape. Now, one can say this was inspired by light, and I think I might have mentioned this image before and talked about how it's inspired by light, but only because there's a shape associated with that light. It's not just random backlighting from an open window, but it's one that has a shape. So the shape is the true inspiration, and that shape comes about via light. Is this image the greatest image in the world? No, right? But it's my image and it's my idea, and I feel fulfilled because it's something I dreamt up and was inspired by the space that I shot in. Another person can come in there and not even think about it based on what that space looked like. They might not even consider shooting there, but I was inspired by the shape and the light, and I used it to create something that was unique to me without seeking inspiration on the internet from somebody else who shot in the same space. So that's just how I approach a lot of things. Is I just do what I want to do, and the things I want to do come from the space, kind of like nudging me, like, "Hey, try this," and I try it, and no one has ever complained. So I think it's working out. Another image, I think it's the final image. This one is, I think I've spoken about this again before, and maybe it's been in talks I've done online or something. And sometimes I don't forget. All these things become a blur after a while. This was shot in Baltimore City, and that's a boarded up building. The black on the top is the boards on the windows of the building, and I have an image where they're just standing in front of it, but the shape on the top made me think, I could create something if I create a reflection. And I did, and I like how it looks like they're merging into the wall on the bottom, like they're just like eventually like merging into it. But it's a reflection of the top reflected down to the bottom, and I like how it creates this whole cross-like shape, and the squares on the top and the squares on the bottom, and it has this almost double exposure looking thing going on, but it's just one image with a reflection. But another example to just show how you can take something as uninteresting as a boarded up building and create abstract backdrops that spark, that creates some level of interest to the viewer. So yeah, these are just a few examples of images inspired by shape. It's just showing you how I do it. The goal is for you guys to take these ideas and make them yours in your own unique way. Figure out how you can apply reflections, how you can, create shapes with other shapes, do things that are graphically interesting to the eye, things that inspire, attention to your images and make them unique and feel like yours, something that's uniquely yours. And if it doesn't work out, it's fine. At least you tried. That's the goal of these things, is to try, so I hope this was helpful. The next video I post will be another series, images inspired by something else, most likely texture. And I'll talk about a bunch of images that the texture inspired, and you'd kind of see the reoccurring theme. But the most important thing is, if you're able to bring all these different elements into the one image, an image inspired by light but has great texture and great shape. You kind of build on the you kind of build on the image in terms of how interesting it becomes, how compelling it becomes when you include all the different inspirations, or you're able to find a place that brings all those different elements together. The image just becomes more and more and more compound and interesting. So I hope this will help you guys. If you guys have anything specific, I say this every video, no one ever says anything. If you guys have anything you want me to talk about specifically, please let me know and I'll try to make a video for it. My goal is to be an open book, but it's also easier when folk have specific things they wanna hear from me or talk about. But yeah, I hope this is helpful. Looking forward to making the next video. I'll see you guys next time. Take care.